Good evening, everyone, and welcome to NatureSpot Live. We start off this evening by reminding you we ask you to submit all of your observations to the NatureSpot website from anywhere in Leicester, Leicestershire, or Rutland. If you're elsewhere in the UK, it's also important that you record, and you can do that directly at the iRecord website, which is at the URL shown here on the screen. So the first thing I'd like to say this evening is that back in March, we asked people to record sightings of the holly leaf miner caused by a very small fly, which is very difficult to identify, but the mines on the surface of holly leaves are quite easy to spot. And we have a lot of records, as you can see from the map, to the west of Leicester, but very few from Rutland and the east. In a month, we've had a lot of extra records submitted. You can see all these extra records and out in Rutland. So thank you to everyone who sent in more records. Keep recording holly leaf miner and all the other leaf miners as well. And you're doing a great job of improving our knowledge of this species. Well, it won't have escaped your attention that after really quite a dry winter, we've had a very wet couple of months. This is the data from the Met Office, and in March we had well over twice the average rainfall that we would normally expect for that month. And so far in April, we've had more than the average rainfall. So it's been pretty wet. And insects have been very hard to find. That's my primary interest. So I decided to go with the flow, as it were, and look for aquatic insects, since those are the ones that it was easiest to find with the amount of rain that we'd had. So I'll just show you some examples of things that I've found recently. This is one of the 4 UK, hopefully you can see that now. Give me a wave if you can see that. This is one of the 4 UK species of backswimmer. So you normally find them in their natural aquatic environment. You find them in this position, but they all look much the same from underneath, I have to say. So the dorsal view is a bit more informative. This is the green backswimmer, Notonecta viridis. I've only found 2 of the 4 species so far, but Dave, I think, has found all 4, so I shall keep looking for these. So these are quite large. These are about 15 or even 20 centimeters long, so quite large insects. And the water boatmen, in contrast, swim the other way up. So they swim with their dorsal side uppermost and hang from the surface. This is one of the larger ones. This is Coryxia panzeri. This is about 15 millimeters long, so this is one of the big chunky water boatmen, but they do come in a whole range of sizes, ranging all the way down to very miniature specimens like this Somatia cleopatra, and this is, I always like to say for scale, this is a normal human finger, always assuming that I'm a normal human, of course, but just to give you a sense of scale, some water boatmen are much smaller than others. So we have very few records for these. They're very easily overlooked, even if you are pond dipping. It would be nice to get some more records. If you have a garden pond, get yourself a white tray and any kind of net and have a fish around in there and see what you can find. We can go, I think, even slightly smaller than that. The so-called pygmy backswimmer, although it's in a slightly different family, as you can see, finger for scale, as usual. And so these can be quite small, and you really do have to sort through the catch from a dip net to find these things, which I'm sure is part of the reason we don't have very many records. But the main reason is that very few people look for these. Interestingly, as of yesterday, we have a new species recorded for Leicestershire and Rutland, Sigara limitata. And this is one I found in Leicester, really rather by chance, yesterday morning. This is a relatively uncommon species. Even where it does occur, it doesn't seem to be particularly common. It's never been recorded here before. But a lot of that has got to do with under recording. So this is the overall specimen. The characteristic of this one is that it has this big dent in its face. It looks like it's run into a door or something. And these back swimmers are not, water boatmen rather, not generally not that easy to identify. Often you need to find a male specimen and take one of the appendages from the front legs. This is called the pala, and the arrangement of these pegs is very characteristic for different species. So we are gradually populating the map with more observations of aquatic bugs. And I think Dave is going to show us a few more aquatic bugs in a little while. And it's all based on the weather that we've been having for the past couple of months. And then my last aquatic bug of the evening is this one, the saucer bug. This is quite a large bug. This is about 1 inch long. I'm told by people I have corresponded with that this can give you a very painful, or I won't call it a nip, because being bugs, these don't have jaws. They have a sort of a beak called a rostrum, which they stab people with. But I'm told that this will envenomate you, and it feels very much like being stung by a bee. I don't think I'll choose to experience that personally. I've been told it's not something to look forward to. One of our larger water bugs, this one from Watermead Park in Leicester. And then lastly, to finish off, not a bug, I thought I would keep the botanists happy. The green-winged orchids are out, one of the highlights of my year. Finally, a nice day when it wasn't raining. Huge numbers of green-winged orchids out at Mary's Meadows, but this is actually at Cribbs Meadow, out to the east. If you fall over here, you're in Cambridgeshire. On the alkaline soils out there, very nice to see them, and nice to have some sunny weather. So, shall I carry on with some of the questions, Dave?
Yeah,
now?
sure.
Or do you want to? Okay. So we've had a couple of questions sent in, and then we'll share some more highlights after that. So the first question is one of our commonly asked questions. So we thought we would talk about this a bit this evening. What should I record? The question being, should I record every blackbird I see in my garden? Or should I record every dandelion I see? Now, we do have guidelines on the NatureSpot website, but Dave, maybe I can ask you to talk to that about guidelines for what to record and what not to bother with.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing to say is there's no hard and fast rule. So if you want to record every blackbird, then that's up to you. What we generally suggest is that you record each species in a given location once a year. That's really to try and encourage people to look more widely and not get too. You can get overwhelmed, can't you, if you record absolutely everything in every single place. So just as a general rule of thumb, I'd say go for record a species in a given location. There are some times though when that rule perhaps doesn't apply. One of those, I think, is if you're doing a more systematic survey, such as if you're running a moth trap, because moth trap data can be analysed differently. The other perhaps group or situation where I do record the same species regularly, for example, from my garden, are kind of under-recorded species that I need to catch and take a specimen and then put them under the microscope, partly because I want to justify having taken the specimen, but also because they are under-recorded, then we don't really know what's common and what's scarce. So if there's only 3 records ever for that species in the whole of the 2 counties, what can you draw from that? So by recording more regularly, you start to see what is the more common species. So as you've said, Alan, we do have some guidance on this on the website, which you can look at. As a general rule with plants, we tend to follow the BSBI guidance. And that also then brings us into the types of species to record, as well as how often to record it. And it's particularly the case with plants, where obviously there's an awful lot of plants that you would find in your garden that aren't really wild. So should you record those? The general rule is no. If it's been planted, then don't record it. Perhaps the exception to that is often large, significant trees. Arguably, nearly every tree is being planted, or certainly a large proportion of them. And when it forms a key landscape feature, then it's actually useful to record it. Of course, trees are around a long time. The other perhaps garden plant that you could record is when it's become naturalized. It's escaped from the garden and it's kind of looking after itself in the open countryside or wasteland or wherever it happens to be. It's no longer tended. It hasn't necessarily been planted. It's spreading and reproducing. And in fact, those kind of plants are quite useful to record, because over time, some of them can become quite dominant. A few of them may be, invasive, unwanted plants. So it's useful for us to keep track of how these are doing.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would add to that is, well, I would add 2 things, in fact. The one is that by recording everything, or at least all the occurrences of a particular species, it gives us a record that allows us to look at something called phenology, which is when things occur as well as where they occur. And obviously with the climate changing, that can be extremely important. If you only record something once a year, obviously it doesn't give you, it may give you the first date or the first emergence, but it doesn't necessarily tell you, whether they're lasting later in the season or when that may be, or if the abundance is changing. The other thing I would like to say is that basically I think recording should be fun. You should enjoy it. I don't think there's anyone here who's being paid to do it. So we have seen people burn out. We have seen people try and record absolutely everything, and it stops being fun. So that's rather than stop altogether. I mean, think carefully about what you're recording. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything. I don't know if Sue or Jeffrey want to add anything to that.
Well, the only thing I would add is that people now use vegetative keys to record plants. And this, I think, is probably likely to affect phenology a little bit. So I think most people on NatureSpot would identify a plant when it's got a flower. So when it's got a flowering time. So, but if people do record it using vegetative key alone, it'd be worth putting that in the notes. So, for example, it's very easy now to identify plants in December, January, and February when they would normally be flowering. So that would be an extra addition I'd like to see. And also, again, in the notes, if people do find plants growing on the sides of the roads, for example, at lay-bys where people have thrown out a load of garden waste, and they are growing and they're establishing quite well and spreading, it's just also useful in the notes to note that these are garden throwouts and they're established on the side of the road. So just a little bit more information really about whether these plants are actually introduced, and in many cases it's easy to determine that. Some places it isn't, but as far as it's possible, it's useful to know if they've been introduced. And also to say, if you're using a vegetative key, that was all.
We have had a debate about how long the comments should be when people submit records. But what I would say is generally the comment box, which is the last box on the record submission form, is underused. So we would encourage people to use that comment box and record extra information of the sort that Jeffrey's just described when they submit a record of anything, really. Yeah, Sue.
The other question I'd got, really, it's very similar to Jeffrey's point, but there's a lot of habitat creation going on at the moment, often associated with the planning applications. So sometimes one of the conditions of the development are that they create a wildflower meadow or a pond or whatever. It's always difficult to know how to record that and how soon. You can assume it's been naturalised. Obviously, people put some wildflower seed down, it germinates, not all of it survives. After a certain while, it's, I assume, perfectly fine to record that because it's become established as a habitat, which is a value and intended to, contribute towards biodiversity. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Jeffrey, and how we should deal with that.
Well, I think again, it's putting a comment in the notes field saying that this appears to be an introduction site, saying whether you think it's spread or not. In many cases, it's not going to be easy because perennial plants will persist and take a long time to spread. Whereas some annuals, of course, will spread reasonably quickly in a couple of years, but then die out. So I think just a little note saying you think it's introduced, it doesn't have to be a long one, is all that's needed, really. In some cases, we just can't tell, particularly, for example, trees and shrubs that were planted in hedgerow recreation schemes 30 or 40 years ago. They're really very difficult to determine. It's very difficult to determine whether they were, when you see them, whether they were actually planted or not, or whether they're native. So just a little note to say, for example, Sue said, if you've got one of its pollinator strips and it's persisted, it's worthwhile saying that you think it's introduced.
Can I just say that I know that around Croft of at least 4 people who are doing a fair bit of gorilla planting.
Yeah.
You will notice a lot of bulbs and also apple trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've no objection to it on the whole because they're mostly on sites that have been created anyway.
I always assume the apple trees have come from pips from people discarding apple cores, but maybe not. But
no, not the
you're
ones
right that daffodils do seem to pop up all over the place unexpected. And there's certainly cultivated varieties. They're not wild daffodils. Yeah.
The ones that tend to pop up in places around Croft and Hunkett, and certainly on the New Hill and on various council plantings and hedgerows in Croft, the younger trees are seedlings from deliberate crosses made by a local apple breeder, and they're his throwouts, which again tend to go to somebody else who bungs them in somewhere if they're a particularly attractive or productive variety, but not up to commercial standards. Some of them are very good for wine.
Yeah, well, perhaps we'll become a cider making county in future years. Well, I think, as Dave said at the beginning, there aren't any hard and fast rules on this. And if you're not sure, as we've said, just give us all the information you can in the comments box when you submit the form, and we'll take the best of it. But probably better to record stuff rather than not to record it. Sue?
The other thing to consider really is to go to different places, isn't it? And it's always nice to go somewhere different. We get very used to going to the same sort of sites that we know and love. But it is really good to, deliberately set out to go somewhere that you've never been before that may not look very exciting on a map, because the odds are it will be under-recorded. And one of the things you can do there is contribute towards filling some of the gaps in recording across Leicestershire and Rutland. I think Alan probably has got a very, very helpful map somewhere that he can show, that shows the sort of general pattern of recording in our two counties, which is very much around Leicester and then going out to Charnwood Forest and through Northwest, the old National Forest area, and then down the Soar Valley and around Hinckley, and then Rutland. There's a large chunk of Leicestershire around Market Harborough and going up through to Melton, and then an area north of Hinckley, which isn't really recorded very well at all. And it would be lovely if people could, you know, try and visit some of these places and see what you can record there. It may well be something new that won't have been done before. You know, places like Charnwood Lodge and Ulverscroft and Bradgate Park are recorded a lot, and it's not that you won't find anything new there, but a lot of things that you see will already have been recorded by someone else.
I don't have that map to hand, so people are going to have to imagine this. But if you imagine, it doesn't matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about plants or insects or animals or birds or whatever. You get the same pattern for all species, and it's basically, if you think about what Leicestershire and Rutland looks like, it's a Y lying on its side, and the top branch of the Y is Charnwood. Going up somewhere going up a bit towards the National Forest, and then it extends down sort of along the M69 a bit to Sapcote for reasons which may be obvious to some of us here. And then it goes, obviously the bit in the middle of the Y is Leicester because it's the biggest population centre, and then the stem of the Y, if you like, goes out along the A47 to Rutland Water. So if you're north of the stem, up in the northeast or in the southeast or even the west of Leicestershire, very, very poorly recorded. So yeah, good point. Okay, is there any would anybody else like to ask anything or say anything about what to record? Hopefully we've made it clearer rather than more confusing. So maybe we'll go on to the next question. This one was from Peter. I don't know if you want to say anything about this, Peter, or shall we just talk through it? We've got some magnificent UPVC, which, as we know, is a very good way of trapping insects. And this caddisfly turned up recently, I think. Helpful size measurements, always really, sometimes you can get the size accurately from a photograph, but sometimes it's really difficult to guess how big something is, so that's very useful. So caddisfly is not a particularly easy group. Fortunately, we have an expert with us tonight. So Ray, would you like to talk us through this one?
Yes, it's definitely a Stenophylax, probably Permistis, which is the one I usually find at this time of year. The difference between the two genera is that this is a large one. This is over 20 millimeters long. The Micropturnus are around 15 to 16 millimeters, so that's an easy one to separate. And the streak that seems to appear at the top of the body as well is distinctive for these two groups, but this is probably Permistis. You can only confirm that by genitalia examination, which is the case with a lot of the caddis, I'm afraid, because they tend to be brown jobs. But this one is probably Permistis. That's the commonest one at this time of year.
So would that be a newly emerged insect, Ray? Would that have just hatched?
Within the last month.
What's the sort of lifespan of these larger caddis?
Well, this one has two generations. It has a spring and it has an autumn generation, and that's particularly in the autumn. You have to be more careful separating the two genera.
Mm-hmm. So they're not an easy group, caddis, but I mean, I think you're always happy to. Most of them require a microscopic examination, but I think you're happy to receive specimens, aren't you, Ray?
Oh yeah, more than happy.
Yeah, so if anybody does come across caddis regularly, anyone who runs a moth trap will come across caddis regularly. You don't need to be particularly close to water. They do fly, after all. They do distribute themselves to new bodies of water through flight, as do most of the aquatic insects, surprisingly. Even things that you wouldn't expect to fly, like the water boatmen, they fly very well, really, turn up all over the place. So
perhaps I should mention, Alan, that you can record caddis in two ways, either using the adults, which is what I prefer, because the adults will actually distribute away from their breeding places, but also in the breeding place, you can look at the larvae, and there are very good keys for the larvae as well. And they're being updated by the National Recorder eventually, but most of them hold up okay. But you need to go paddling in the water to get the larvae, I'm afraid. Interesting though, they're very interesting insects.
I think there's a new book out on caddis. I think it's out, isn't it, Ray? Ian Wallace's new book.
Yes.
For anyone who's particularly keen on knowing more on caddis.
Hang on a sec, I'll find it for you.
I mean, either way up, you're going to wind up putting the majority of them under the microscope, probably.
Yes, I like to do genitalia. Am I on screen at all anyway?
Yes, you are. Yeah,
Oh.
We can see you. Yeah.
Can you see the book?
Yes.
Yeah. I've reviewed this. It's not the sort of book I would normally use, but it's a good starter. It does point you in the right direction. And it's only £20.
There we go. It's a bargain. Adult caddis Trichoptera of Britain and Ireland for anybody who's interested.
It's Ian Wallace, Sharon, and Peter Flynn. You get it from the Field Studies Council.
Excellent. Well, if anybody, if there are any questions emerging from this evening that we don't answer, then just drop us an email at the NatureSpot email address, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah.
Can I just ask whether that idea of permistus is certain enough for a record, or without the genital examination, you just have to put it down as a probable?
No, that one, Peter, I'll accept from the picture.
Okay, thank you.
You were going to add something, Ray?
I've forgotten what it was now.
Okay. Let us know if you think of it.
Oh, yes, I just remembered. I don't mind how the adult caddis is sent to me, because if they come dry, I do genitalia as a matter of course anyway, and I soak them, so it doesn't matter if they're dead, alive, or whatever. As long as I got the back end, I don't mind.
Okay, just the back end, right? Okay,
well,
probably easier if you send the whole thing, though.
Of course.
Okay, and Peter had another question as well from a recent observation. So this was a gall on Forsythia, and I think this is an interesting one. I think Sue, you wanted to say something about this.
It's interesting, but also deeply frustrating, because it's not uncommon. You do see these quite a lot, and they do worry gardeners quite a bit. So horticulturalists have been bothered about this very disfiguring growth, and it also does stop sort of flowering. I think you can see that there's
it's crown gall.
Buds going on here. What causes it? There are lots of theories which are quite compelling, some of them. Probably the most likely cause is a bacterium of sorts.
Corynebacterium.
Sorry?
Corynebacterium.
Yes, that's right. The trouble is, how do you prove that? So people have isolated the bacteria from the galls. They've made a pure culture of it. When they've tried to inject that into healthy plants, were not affected. It's not caused the gall. Actually prove that is the thing that is causing the gall. And always with these bacterial galls, that's what you have to do to actually establish what's causing it. So it remains a bit of a mystery, really. There are other theories with a Pseudomonas bacterium that could cause it as well, and people don't really know. This is one that causes really serious commercial problems to olive groves in the Mediterranean. Some subspecies may well cause these galls on ash and other plants quite closely related to Forsythia. They're not that far apart in terms of their taxonomy. So how you record it is really difficult because we can't put a name to it.
Well, it's the old thing about galls. If you can't name the causer, just name the plant and say what it looks like.
Yeah.
It
Really
needs to be a record.
It's very difficult to know what to do. And what we have got on NatureSpot is we have set up a small section of the galls gallery called unknown causers, or sort of general odds and ends of things which may be caused by viruses or whatever. So we can set up a page for this if people would wish to record it. The thing to remember, though, is that the records won't go anywhere else, because if you don't actually have a name for anything, it can't be added to national databases for galls or for any other organisms. So it's not the only gall like this. There's one that's very common on willows called the mossy willow catkin. That doesn't have a name either. No one knows quite what causes that one.
But I mean, we've got some excellent photos here. It would be very nice to have those on the website. So it would be very nice to have the record submitted. So you can always, even if you don't know what things are, you can always submit a record. So in this case, submit it as unknown plant gall, and then we'll sort it out from there. Because we don't think we've got a page for this at the moment, but we will add it to our mystery gallery.
Yeah, we don't have a page set up. I've recorded it several times in Leicestershire, and I suspect it's quite common in gardens. Sally has got her hand up, so
yeah.
Come across it, don't you, Sally?
Hello. Well, that particular one, I think, is quite a common thing in certain varieties of Forsythia. It's a proliferation of vegetative shoots. It's transmissible by sap. It's not the same as crown gall. If you prune that Forsythia with dirty secateurs, and you then prune a healthy Forsythia without cleaning your secateurs first, you will almost certainly transmit that. And that's what happens when you take cuttings or grafts and you're doing it quickly in the nursery.
Consistent with it being a bacterial infection, of course. So yeah, but
it's not the same as crown gall, which affects all sorts of things.
Yeah,
that particular one's exclusive to Forsythia.
Crown galls are also caused by a bacterium.
Yeah, Agrobacterium tumefaciens, which I think has just been renamed.
I can't keep up with the name changes at the moment. Rhizobium radiobacter, I think, is another name for it, but it's that has been proved to cause galls, so we can put a name to that. The difficulty with crown galls is that they form so many and sort of lumpy woody growths on trees and collared galls around the collars of beetroots and things like that.
Yeah. Oh no, that's scab. That's different.
Huge range of forms.
Yeah. It's all right. I have these as members' inquiries daily.
I imagine, Sue, that you cultivate these. Don't you have a garden full of galls? So are you sort of deliberately infecting everything in your garden to cultivate them? I would be in your position, I think.
Well, no.
Okay.
I really don't like Forsythia, so I'm really happy not to grow it.
Yeah, but this is a great gall. Look, it's fantastic, isn't it? You'd want the gall. You can't have it without the Forsythia. So, okay. Well, thanks for that one. Hopefully, we've illuminated a little bit, Peter, even if we don't have a definitive answer. And that's it from me. So I'm going to hand over now to Dave, who has got some observations to show as well.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it. Do you want to put it on full screen? That's
Yeah,
it.
there we go. Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't want Alan to have all the glory for recording his new bug for Leicestershire, because I had this one a few weeks ago, which is also new to Leicestershire and Rutland. Interestingly, I found it in the River Soar at Narborough Bog. I hadn't gone out with the intention of pond dipping, but I always carry a little child's net in my bag because it doesn't weigh anything and it packs down to nothing. And if you're familiar with Narborough Bog, you can't actually get to the river very easily, but there are one or two places where there is a little bit of access. And so I just had a little sweep and hey presto, this came up. So you never know what you're going to find. Interestingly, it's one of the 3 Cymatia species that we get in the UK. The little tiny one that Alan showed on his finger earlier is the smallest of them, and the other 2 are a bit bigger, and this is one of them. They are different to some of the other water boatmen in that on the pronotum, a bit behind the head here, it doesn't have the stripes that you see on most of the others. So it has this kind of like tessellated pattern. So that is quite a diagnostic feature. And the 3 species of Cymatia that we do get are all identifiable really from pictures, and they're easy to distinguish from each other. In fact, the easiest way to distinguish them is to simply look at the head and the pronotum. The little tiny one that you saw earlier, the head is much, much bigger than the pronotum. In this case, as you can see, the pronotum is bigger than the head. And in the 3rd species, they're about the same size. So once you get to the genus, it's quite easy to get to the species. The other interesting and different feature with Cymatia, unlike most of the others, is that on the rostrum, the little beaky bit at the front of the face, it doesn't have those transverse grooves that you see on most of the others. So with a lot of groups, that they can seem a little bit overwhelming really when you first come to them and you're not familiar with them. But once you learn a few of these little identification features, it helps to narrow it down. Then it becomes quite exciting. I also thought I'd throw a plant in. This was one I came across a few weeks ago at Welford Road Cemetery. It was a plant I'd never seen before, and I didn't know what it was, but it's quite large. And interestingly, it was absolutely swarming in bees. Very clearly naturalized. It was covering quite a large area. And actually, Jeffrey kindly identified it for me. It's got a weird common name, Abraham Isaac Jacob. And I'm intrigued to actually know what the origin of that name is. Gone far away.
Okay, I was going to say the one in Welford Road Cemetery, I can account for that one. There's a big clump at the Botanic, and about 40 years ago I was working for the Botanic, who also at that stage did some of the university mowing, and the bloke at the cemetery had a heart attack, and we were asked to take over the maintenance for a while until they got somebody new. And we distributed various things that were rather in quantity in Leicester Botanic into spare corners.
Right. Well,
because somebody had bees there.
It's clearly done well. It was covering quite a significant area.
Yes, it does. It does very well, but it's good bee fodder, which is why it was put there.
Yeah, it also forms a bit of a monoculture, I noticed.
Yes, that as well. It's a good weed suppressant. It got rid of the bindweed nicely.
Yeah, the dead leaves form a kind of mat, and nothing else could grow through it. But yeah, I thought when I saw it was some kind of borage, and I was interested to see earlier
I believe that
it's referred to as Oriental borage.
Yeah, I believe the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the stamens, because they change colour.
Yes, I read that, and apparently there are a few plants that have had that same name, but I don't know the biblical connection as to why the changing colour would give it that name?
Well, I suppose it was Jacob's code.
Ah, of course, yeah.
It's pH related.
Okay.
Certainly with borage and with lungwort, it changes. I can't remember if it changes from acid to alkaline or the other way around offhand.
Okay, interesting.
And it also does it for the urine of pregnant women. Because one of our undergardeners was pregnant and tested it just to see if it worked.
Okay.
And it does, but it doesn't for anybody else.
Yeah, but it's interesting that we were talking earlier about what to record. I mean, you wouldn't normally record garden plants, but where they've clearly taken off and they're naturalizing, then as this one has, then I think it is important to record it.
Yeah. Just
so moving on, and interesting, Alan, that you mentioned about going to different sites. I went to a site up near Shepshed last week called Piper Wood, which I've never been to before. It's actually ancient woodland owned by the Delisle estate, but there's public access into the wood. And I came across this slug here, which has got a common name, the rusty false keel slug. It's a member of the Arian genus, and Arians are often referred to as the roundback slugs because they don't have a keel. Some slugs have this kind of, if you imagine like an upturned rowing boat with a kind of keel down the back. This whole family don't have that, except this one pretends to have one. And you can just see it down its back here. There's raised tubercles down the middle of its back. And it also has this habit of kind of flattening itself out. And again, you can see it on this image. So this is a species of slug that's becoming increasingly common. I don't really know why, but it was, I think I found it for the first time a few years ago, and now it pops up all over the place. It's possibly one of those species that's under-recorded. That's the case often with many mollusks. Not that many people record them, which is a shame because most of them are identifiable from a photo. They're not that tiny. You just need to turn over a few logs.
I have got the new slug book.
Oh, excellent. It's a good book as well. This was another one I found in the same wood. The tawny glassnail. It is quite small, but it has this kind of conical shape. If you know the girdles snail, which has a similar shape, which is a bigger version. Now, interestingly, nationally, and if you read all the books, it's supposed to be pretty common in woodland, but yet you look in our area and there's hardly any records. So it makes you wonder what's going on. Is it that it's under-recorded, or is it that there's something about our geology, perhaps, that means it's less common?
Or is it because we don't have very much woodland?
Well, maybe that too. This is the entire list of records for this species. And so you can see that apart from the little handful back in 87, when there was a very kind of keen group of mollusk recorders, it then disappeared for 40 years. And then it's only been recorded on 4 different sites since. So it'd be an interesting one to look out for. It's not hard to identify. So I do think it's probably uncommon in the county. And just to finish with, I just pointed this one out. This came into my garden a couple of days ago, and kind of it was almost dead. It was when it was really cold. So I'm afraid I finished it off. It's one of the Nemada bees. They are a group of bees that I suppose are wasp mimics. They look like wasps, but they are actually bees, but they're parasitic on mining bees. And they could be quite hard to identify because there's a lot of variation in them. There are, I think, 3 species that don't have any red on the abdomen. It's just a pattern of yellow and black. And those 3 can be done quite straightforwardly from a picture, but if they've got any red on the abdomen at all, then it needs to be keyed, and even then it can be quite tricky. So I wasn't that confident about working out what this one was, but I discovered that it has mandibles that have this kind of bifid end to it. You have to put it under a microscope to see, but I've just pointed it out there. Very unusual, and there's only actually 2 Nemada species that have that feature. The other one is virtually all red, so it's very different. So another example of, once you know the feature to look for, if you can actually find it, then you've got clear proof that it is that species. But there's a lot of stuff around now, so it gets a bit overwhelming for invertebrates. You wait all winter for the insects to come back to life, and then you can't kind of identify them fast enough. So yeah, I love this time of year. So that's me done.
Okay, thanks very much. So I think what we'll do now is just thank everyone that sent in questions, and everyone that's commented, everyone that shared their expertise tonight. And with that, we'll stop the recording. Hopefully we'll do one of these again. Maybe in the autumn we'll do another one again. And we hope to run some ID sessions as well on Zoom, but we'll see about that over the next few months. Ray's got a comment. You want to turn your microphone on? Yeah.
Just a quickie, really. I've got a request for NatureSpot recorders. I'm looking at the hoverflies of the 2 counties, and I've come across one called Cheilosia cerulescens. And this one now is unusual. It actually mines the leaves of house leek. We have records for the county. We've got 9 records, most of which come from Empingham, but only 4 sites. And checking on the hoverfly recording scheme, this is something that's come in from Holland, probably with imported plants, and is slowly spreading, but they still consider it to be a southern species. But we've got it in Leicestershire. So if anybody's got house leeks this year, can you check them for leaf mines? Because it'll be this hoverfly, which is quite a large hoverfly.
Okay.
Can I just say, at the moment, house leeks are an in species, and nurseries are propagating them like mad. So they need to be on established, known plants rather than ones they've just got from the garden centre, because otherwise they may be just imported from Holland straight away.
But I suspect that all the garden records will be sourced from nurseries anyway. So yeah, it's not a sort of, but Jeffrey can confirm, it's not really an indigenous plant to Britain. So
do we have records of that on NatureSpot, Ray? Do you know if we've got a page set up for that?
Yes.
Okay, so people,
I've got 2 pictures from NatureSpot on the screen in front of me. So
okay, so people can go and see it and see what the leaf mines look like for themselves.
Yeah. And Andy at Empingham has put up a picture of the actual leaf mines itself. So
excellent. Well done. Just say the name again.
No, I'm sorry. That's wrong, actually. That's the hoverfly he's put a picture of. But if you go onto the Royal Horticultural Society website, they've got pictures of the leaf mines.
Okay, great. So that's one to look out for, and I'm sure we've got an enthusiastic group of leaf miners in the county, or shall I say leaf mine enthusiasts, maybe I should say. So we always like looking for records of leaf mines, and then mostly they can be identified. Some of them are a bit tricky, but there we go. Okay, so thanks everyone, and with that we'll stop this recording.